Roughly 2 months ago, I said this. In roughly 2 months' time, I'm going to be returning to Dead Rails. And if some of these major issues and some of these things are not sorted by then I think the developers have shown their hand, slipped into complacency, and simply don't care. That said, if I come back and the opposite is true, I'll be thoroughly impressed. And so, we're back. Today, I took another look into Dead Rails, this time playing it significantly longer than the last time I played it, for reasons that we'll get into eventually. If you're curious of the total playtime, it came out to a little over 5 hours, which all things considered, that's a pretty long time. Now, for the sake of clarity, what I'm basically going to be doing with this video is going through all of the big points that I made in my initial Dead Rails video and seeing the current state of them now. Because after playing the game, to my surprise, there was a lot of things that were actually quite improved. And to my disappointment, there were an equal amount of things that weren't. And so I think it's important to talk about those things and also give my ideas on how I would remedy them, because this isn't meant to be a teardown, nor was the first video. It's to help the people behind it if they see it, and if not, to be a critique on the internet for people to watch and enjoy. Either way, we'll start off the video talking about something that I was kind of wrong about in the previous video, but also kind of not, and also something that's been dramatically improved upon in the most recent build of Dead Rails that I played. And that is, of course, enemy types. When I initially played Dead Rails, there were basically no enemy types in this game, or at least not a lot of them that really mattered. Especially when it came to the fact that guns just sort of trivialized all of the enemy types, and that still is a problem to this day, so I'm hoping they can get on that, and I'll get into it more in a second. But regardless, basically what it came down to was there were melee enemies that charged directly at you and you could just shoot them, and then there were ranged enemies, which would actually shoot back at you. Melee weapons themselves were almost entirely ineffective, and still remain almost entirely ineffective outside of the very beginning of the game, which if you're playing solo, like me, and you know what you're doing, like me, you'll never even touch a melee weapon anyway, because right off the bat you can just buy a gun, and yeah, not interacting with melee combat is a real nice thing in this game. Now, that said, I think it's important to correct something that I said in the original video, which was basically saying that there were no enemy types in the game, which I don't think is fair. Just because the enemy types themselves are basically all the same when it comes to interacting with them later on the game, doesn't mean that they don't exist. At the time I was playing, there were normal zombies which walk about as fast as you, if not slightly slower, and are brain dead. They'll walk into walls, just get stuck on everything, they were useless. Then you had the faster zombies, which to my knowledge had slightly better pathfinding, and also had more HP and moved faster than you, which made them a much bigger threat, especially if you didn't have a gun. There were some special types of zombies in the boss areas of the game, most specifically the Fort Constitution area, which included zombies with swords and zombies with guns, but I didn't talk about those because I simply didn't run into them when I went to go play the game. I never entered the fort, so there was no way I was going to run into those enemies. Moving past the zombies and keeping on the more mystical front, if there was a blood moon out, then vampires would spawn, and these are basically zombies, but they have the ability to teleport behind you if you get too close to them. Once again, if you have a gun, it doesn't matter. In fact, I don't even have footage to show you of them teleporting because it never happened to me, because I would always just shoot them long before they had the chance. And finally, for melee mystical enemies, we have the werewolf. This big bad motherfucker has a ton of health, he moves way faster than you, and he does a ton of damage. Sometimes there's a night event where these will exclusively spawn, and sometimes they'll spawn seemingly in the place of wolves in these little wolf packs, but that's about it. Oh, and in the big castle Dracula area or whatever. I said fuck that and ran the hell away because I didn't want to die, but they're there too. And then when it came to ranged enemies, well, I pretty much already talked about this in the last video and it hasn't changed a whole lot. I already mentioned that the Fort Constitution area had zombies with guns, but outside of that, you had the Outlaws, which had guns and all behaved exactly the same, and that's it. Either way, the question of the day is, did they improve upon the enemy types? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely they did. I didn't go on the wiki in order to look at all the enemy types that were in the game, but I can tell just by playing that there have been improvements made here, and I'm really glad about that. There are bomber-type enemies that will light off an explosive and run at you, and can even damage all of the surrounding enemies as well, which can make them either an asset or a detriment, depending on how you use them. There are armored zombies, which are a little bit slower, but can tank a ton of rounds. You've still got your standard zombies and your fast zombies as normal, but now there's also sheriff zombies, which, just like the outlaws, can fire guns at you. Generally speaking, this makes clearing the town areas of the game a lot more interesting because, well, it's not just the same old run into the same 2 zombie enemy types throughout the entire town. There's actually stuff going on. So, most certainly 1 point to Dead Rails there. Now, while we're talking about the topic of the AI and the enemy types in the game, did the AI improve? Because last time, maybe somebody's gonna come out with the excuse of, oh, they're mindless zombies, so they don't understand what's going on. Do you think that the mindless zombie would endlessly walk into a wall forever? In what media have you ever consumed would a zombie just forever walk into a wall? It feels stupid, it looks stupid, and that's because it is stupid. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled. And, well... oh, god damn it. Okay, this is being disingenuous, because this is not the norm. To my absolute astonishment, they made a lot of improvements to the AI. A lot of things that people probably wouldn't have thought of, but also things that I've talked about in several of my videos in past. And so I'm so glad that I'm seeing stuff used here. I think the number one most important thing that they did seemingly was to make it so that way if a zombie can't see you, then it's not going to aggro onto you. I figured this out pretty quickly when I went to go test if the AI would brainlessly try to attack me through a wall, and it never happened, because the AI isn't going to aggro onto me through the wall, so it won't blindly walk into the wall. And the only reason that the AI got stuck in the clip I just showed you was because it saw me through the window and thinks it can get through the window, which obviously it can't. Now, these AIs themselves don't have any more improved pathfinding, and this is likely due to something that I already knew but I should have mentioned in the previous video, and something that people brought up incessantly, and I agree with them. And the main reason that they probably don't have good pathfinding on a lot of the AI is that AI pathfinding, especially if it's complex, can be incredibly resource intensive. And so if you have a lot of AI all running a pathfinding script all at the same time and it's constantly updating, for lower end systems like mobile devices, that can be a headache real fast. And the thing is, this is the point where a lot of developers would go, and see, I can't do anything. I'm helpless to fix it. It's Roblox's problem, and so it'll just remain broken because I can't do anything. But not the people behind this game. And this is gonna make all of you assholes out there who say that look real shitty. Because not only did they make it so that way the AI won't aggro onto you through walls for no reason, they also adjusted the map design in some areas of the game in order to play in tune with the already problematic pathfinding to offset it. Do you remember this clip from my previous video where I stood on this slightly inverted thing and the zombies just stood there and I killed them for free? Well, things have changed. Yeah, this is something that I talked about way back in my Blocks Fruit video, if you believe that. And I'm talking about the original one. You know, where I spent a week in Blocks Fruit? Yeah, that one from like a year, 2 years ago. In that video, for those who don't remember, I was talking about how, at the very least, if your pathfinding is going to suck, then you should be designing your maps and your AI around the pathfinding. So in the case of Blocks Fruit, if the AI can't go up steps, then don't put steps everywhere and let the AI get to a point where it has to go up the steps because you know that it can't. If the solution is putting in ramps or putting in ladders instead of steps, then you should do that instead of just having the AI completely incapable of getting up steps. At that point, you would just design the map in order to make it so that the AI doesn't have to go up the stairs. And if it gets to a point where it can't go up the stairs, then it despawns. Maybe limit the boss to just that room. But they didn't do that. They just said, F it, we don't care. The boss can't go up the stairs, doesn't matter, ship it. And this is a fantastic example of developers doing just that. They made the surfaces of these inclines climbable, so that way if the AI does blindly run into it because players trying to cheese by getting on top, they can't, because the AI will climb up and still attack the player instead of getting stuck. The AI doesn't need to be programmed to jump. It doesn't need to be programmed to go around objects, because it can get up this obstacle regardless. Will the AI still get stuck on houses? Sure. Will the AI still get stuck on other objects potentially? Sure. But the goal here was to make a blatant and obvious broken, stupid-looking mechanic not look that way. And in the case of this, they succeeded with flying colors. Now, you may be under the impression that with the AI fixed, now that'll change a lot when it comes to the difficulty of the game. Another thing that I mentioned in my initial video. Well, not quite. First, the good things. The most important thing that they did in Dead Rails, in my opinion, was adding difficulty settings. When I first played, there was only one difficulty to play on, and once you figured out how to do it, it was brain dead easy. It was unironically, if you've completed it once, you can complete it an unlimited amount of times, because you could just abuse all of these different mechanics, something that I'll be getting to in just a moment, and you'd win for free. But now with the introduction of new difficulty settings, that changes things up drastically. I didn't end up playing the Scorched Earth game mode, so I don't know how good or bad that one is, but I can say that Nightmare mode is actually handled quite well, and there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes here other than what it just says in the initial little blurb here. The blurb says that there's less loot and you don't regenerate health, and that's what makes things harder. But there's some other stuff on display, and some other stuff that I would have liked to have seen that legitimately make things harder. Probably the most important one is that items in the shop, when you buy them, don't respawn indefinitely anymore, which is such a welcome fresh air change when it came to the issue with scarcity that I was talking about in the previous video. And of course, the other big heavy hitter here is that I'm 90% sure that the enemy's damage is increased on Nightmare as well, which means that the already finite health that you have, which requires you to interact with the healing items that I almost completely ignored in my initial playthrough of this game, are now integrally important, because if you take any damage, then you're probably going to want to heal it, because then if you get into a fight with something that does a lot of damage, you're just going to be dead, and that's the end of it. All of the changes in here just mark for a significantly harder and significantly more fun experience, as it seems like the game was initially designed to be played around. And I think that the way they have it now is great, because one of the things that I didn't really consider in the first video, but I do think is important to take note of, is that Dead Rails is intended at its core to be an accessible experience. Just like any other game on Roblox that wants a player base, if this isn't playable by the masses, then you're not going to have a lot of people playing it. And clearly, the game is accessible by the masses based on the player counts. And the issue is, if you make the game too hard, then a lot of people just aren't going to be able to play it. And that's where difficulty settings and things come in, and why they're so important, because for some people the game might be too hard, and for some people it's too easy, and difficulty settings let you offset a lot of that stuff. That said, some of the problems with difficulty have not quite been addressed. I think the most important one of those is when it comes to difficulty scaling, something I also mentioned in my initial video. To put it simply, the difficulty scaling in this game is still horrifically awful. You're still absolutely useless at the start, and you still basically become an unkillable god by the end. And that stems from the fact that there's no real thing in place, as far as I know, to make the game easier at the start and harder towards the end. It's a static difficulty from the very beginning to the very end of the game, which means that at the beginning, it's really, really difficult. Well, assuming that you don't know all of the cheese strats anyway. But even if you do know them, it can still be relatively difficult, and it still is just objectively way harder than it gets later on. At the beginning, you feel completely ill-equipped to deal with anything, and the threats that can be sent against you can range from normal zombies to a night full of werewolves that you can barely fight back against. And then later on in the game, You have borderline infinite fuel, borderline infinite ammo, and no matter what the game sends at you, you're just gonna kick its ass anyway, so it doesn't even matter. I really hope there becomes some sort of scaling at some point for this game, because without it, it makes the already extremely samey feeling gameplay feel even more samey on repeat playthroughs. But while we're on the topic of being under-equipped at the beginning of the game, we can talk about how it heavily encourages you to once again exploit the mechanics of the game, and most importantly, how exploitable the bases still are. Now, what I'll say right from the get-go is I think the bases in their current state in the normal mode is perfectly fine, because the normal mode is clearly intended for your average Roblox player. Your average Roblox player is not very good at games, and so they need all the help they can get. That they should upend a lot of these systems in order to satiate me and my desire to have a more challenging and fair experience. That said, on game modes like Nightmare and potentially above, I really think some changes need to be made here. I did think that it was cool that they've added some real people to the turrets now, and real people walking around in the town, so it doesn't feel like there's just weird-ass auto turrets going off all the time. But the trade-off is that all the cheese stuff that you could do in the initial video that I was talking about, you can still do in the current game. Head to a town, just wait for nighttime, have enemies spawn on you, and the AI with its extremely large ammo capacity will just kill everything that spawns, and then you can sell all of it for free cash. It's incredibly broken on its own and leads to the progression often massively spiraling out of control, as even on Nightmare I'm able to get tons of ammo and tons of fuel, basically buying up everything in the entire town and then still having money left over. I mentioned something in my previous video and I'm going to mention it again here because I think it would be a great addition to the game. It would alleviate this issue slightly and also make the game a lot more interesting on the whole. One of the big issues with the towns that you get to and the checkpoints is that they're always the same and they always have all the same stuff in them. There's always the same guns and the same amount of guns. There's always the same ammo and the same amount of ammo. There's always going to be a sheriff's area where you can turn in outlaws, always a trading post to trade in your goods, and always a general store, albeit their stock is random. Once again, on normal mode, I think this is fine, but on later difficulties, I think that there definitely should be some randomness when it comes to what's here and when it's there. It would be so much more impactful to buy a rifle from a shop if you haven't seen one for most of the game and get lucky and one shows up in a gunsmith, rather than there always being 2 rifles available in every shop that you pass, where you pass 7 shops. Or just that much more heartbreaking when you have to make the choice between potentially getting a weapon early that you might not see later on, but you don't even have a choice because you need to fuel the train. The thing is, better players are paying attention to the train fuel and making sure that they have enough. And so while I kind of understand that the bases are probably there to make sure that if you don't have enough fuel, then it'll spawn enemies in that the game will kill for you, and then you can get fuel for the train for free, on higher difficulties, this just isn't necessary. The ammo for the AI should be bare bones at best, and I really think there needs to be more variety on what is in the shop and when it's there. Now, moving forward with difficulty and problems with the difficulty, we can talk about something else that I talked about in the first video, which is the train. I made a complaint in the first video that the train is basically infallible and you never have to stop, and it's still true. I am desperately begging the people behind this game to add some sort of event that actually forces you to stop. The fact that you can just hold forward and if you have enough fuel, you can bypass 80% of the game is just astronomically stupid. Like, I get it, you're expected to stop along the way in order to pilfer, but if you're doing well for yourself, you never have to do that. In my first playthrough, I barely experienced any of the side content because I just blew past it all because I had no reason to stop. Dead zombies that have piled up on the train tracks you need to clear. Roadblocks set up by the outlaws. The stuff writes itself. Come on, guys. But that honestly does kind of segue us into another problem that I mentioned in the previous video and that is still true to this day, and that's that this game gets old real fast. Even with the introduction of the game modes and all that stuff, it's the same thing. While there are definitely some minor things that have changed, in the grand scheme of things, you can barely tell the difference between Dead Rails 2 months ago versus Dead Rails now, and that's kind of a bummer. If I didn't have a reason to continue playing for this video, I probably would have hopped on for maybe 20 minutes, realized it was exactly the same, and then jumped out. That sucks, and I understand that I'm sure the variety here in terms of what you can give people to do is kind of difficult, but surely there's gotta be some stuff to do, because even the new stuff that I interacted with for me wasn't new back when I was playing before. Lots of people mentioned that I never fought the Nikola Tesla boss, and I did that this time around. Now, that thing has its own problems, like the fact that when I first went to go do it, I spent hours and hours and hours and hours getting all the way up to the final boss, then got confused as to why it wasn't spawning and didn't know where it would spawn, and then it spawned directly on top of me, killed me instantly in one hit because this is nightmare mode, and then I foolishly decided to spend money in order to revive myself because I'd just spent hours and hours and hours getting there, only for the game to decide to take all of my items away when I got self-revived. Thanks, game. So then I just died again, surprise, surprise. Got pissed off, went all the way back, did all of it again on normal mode, realized how piss easy it was in order to do, and then, because I'm spiteful, I went back on nightmare mode again and beat it just to say that I did. But the point is, even spawning this boss is such a joke, because you can just range it out and shoot it with the electrocutioner gun and it dies basically instantly. I would barely even classify it as a boss. This isn't impressive. And it lends itself to the extreme flaw with the final area of the game, because there's even more problems with the final area of the game than I initially thought. Originally, I mentioned the fact that there's so much ammo here that it almost doesn't even matter what you prepared yourself for. Once you get here, you get enough ammo to clear it 3 times over anyway. That much hasn't changed, not even on Nightmare Mode, where, honestly, in my opinion, I don't think there should be any ammo in here on Nightmare Mode. This should be a test of your preparation skills, not the game just going, here you go, here's an arsenal. But the real problem here is that the horse just completely removes any threat that this area would ever serve. Now, the horse in of itself is something I haven't really talked about in the game. I didn't really talk about it too much last time, but this time around I'll talk about the horse, which is hilariously overpowered and stupidly easy to get. Horses run faster than every single enemy in the entire game and have no stamina limit. You can ride it forever, it will never slow down, and it goes faster than everything. Sure, it can be a bit cumbersome to control, and sure, if you try to back up with it, it glitches out half the time. But either way, that ability is hilariously broken. And in the final area of the game, it's double broken. And that's because, despite what I originally thought, when you lower the bridge in this game, you never have to go to the bridge. So if you have a horse, you can literally, no joke, get on the horse, run out of the fort, and just wander into the desert for 3 minutes until the timer's up, and then you win! Yay! Good job, man, you did it! Are you fucking serious? This is like the most critical design failure in a game I've ever seen. You can just skip the final encounter by running away, and then you win! I just, like, and it's not like they don't know this. There's an achievement in the game for killing the Nikola Tesla boss and then hoofing it back to the town that you originally came from to sell it before the timer expires. They know! And they still made it this way! Why don't you have to cross the bridge? You'd think if you ran the hell away that a bunch of outlaws would just set themselves up and make your life way harder the next time you came there, but nope, that's not how it works. I can't even fathom how this is the end of the game. And I'm shocked that I got duped into thinking that it was so much cooler than it is the first time I played. Anyways, the last thing that I had on my list that I talked about last time in the previous video was microtransactions. I talked about the flaws of the system when it comes to buying one-time use items, how I kind of like the class system, and how I hope they change some of the stuff when it came to one-time uses, and they've done nothing on that front. So I don't know what else I can really say
aside from the fact that they added the ability to buy more trains, but that's laughable in its own right because one of the trains just turns it gold and doesn't do anything. One of the trains gives you a little bit of cover on the back of the train that doesn't mean anything. And one of the trains is the armored train, which has guns and it's armored, except for it takes up more fuel, which means it would make the already tedious gameplay loop even more tedious. No thank you. But at the end of the day, with all of this complaining and all of my issues with the game, what I have to say is twofold. Number one, in the original video, at the beginning of the video, when I talked about coming back in 2 months' time, I talked about whether or not the developers would give a shit or if they would just get complacent and not care. And I think it's a little bit in the middle. But if you want my honest opinion, I expected them to do absolutely nothing. So the fact that that didn't happen is already huge points in my book. And the other thing that I feel like I have to mention at this point is that while I've been pretty critical of the game, I want to say that I'm glad people are playing this, and I'm glad this game succeeded. There are a lot of people out there, and I don't blame them. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but there are a lot of people out there that were upset with my original video praising some of the aspects of Dead Rails because they feel that Dead Rails does not earn the player count that it has because it clearly doesn't have as much time and work put into it as other games that don't get the spotlight. And I understand that mindset. Trust me, I do. That said, what I think is important to understand here is that Dead Rails has a lot of respect for the player that I think needs to be considered and commended. In the age of AFK clicker games and games that try to prey on short attention spans as much as possible, Dead Rails is a game that demands roughly an hour of your time to complete in its entirety, all in one sitting. And this isn't an hour of doing nothing. It's not an hour of mindless grind, at least not necessarily. It's an hour of thought-provoking decision-making that you need to do throughout the entire duration of the game. It's an hour of straight gameplay. And like I said, in the age of clicker games, in the age of the success of Grow a Garden, a game that literally encourages you to not play it, here's a game that's successful and encourages you to play. Just because Dead Rails isn't the perfect golden goose that you were looking for and isn't the most fantastic game under the sun doesn't mean that it shouldn't be celebrated when a game that actually has a game on Roblox is successful. So, the final thing that I really have to say as a part of this pseudo follow-up to my original video is hats off to the people behind this. Seriously, good job. I wish that more actual games on the platform got the attention that this game gets. And credit where credit is due for the things that I didn't think that you were gonna fix, that you did. With that though, I am wrapping up today's video. Naturally, if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.